Hey, what's up guys? JB here, and I'm back again today with another Versus video. And honestly, it's been a minute since I've done one of these. And I really try to save these for when we have a highly anticipated 100 cost unit coming into the game, one that maybe has a similar role to another 100 cost that we already have. And today that's going to be Dark Fina, a new 100 cost Dark Elemental Mage. And she's going to be joining us here in Global within the next couple of weeks, maybe even as soon as next week. We'll just have to kind of see what they do with the schedule. Now, a lot of you out there probably already have a unit that has many similar capabilities as Dark Fina, and that would be none other than Black Rose Helena, a hugely popular and meta-defining unit when she was released. So which of these two units is better for the current state of War of the Visions? And do you even need another Dark Mage at this point? Well, today we're going to be trying to answer those questions and more. We're going to be doing a deep dive comparison into the nitty-gritty of their kits to see exactly what they bring to the table and what they don't. And when we're done, we'll all know which Dark Mage Waifu reigns supreme. Now, I do just want to say real quick, guys, before we get into the battle, we are going to be doing this comparison today, including Helena's forthcoming Mastery 2 updates, and she should actually be getting those relatively soon. So with that said, let's get into it, guys. And we're going to start it off as we always do with a stat comparison, but we're going to be doing it a little bit different today. I've been waiting to do this Versus video for quite a while, pretty much ever since Dark Fina was first announced on the Japanese side, and I created something special for this comparison, so check it out. Alright, I really hope you liked that one, guys. I definitely put a lot of work into that, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Interesting stat comparison there, though, for sure. When it comes to the pure stats alone, they're actually remarkably similar in many ways. And I think there's really only a couple of key points of differentiation there, specifically maybe the magic value, that base value for Fina is very, very strong. And then, of course, a couple of the damage resistance and ailment resistances are a little bit different as well. Very, very close though overall, and I don't really think anyone is really walking away with anyone here in the stats comparison. Alright, so we're going to kick off the battle here now with round 1, and this is the damage round. And we're going to be going to look at their pure damage related attributes and kind of see how they're stacking up against each other. Now, as far as innate magic values, obviously this is going to be one of the most important things when it comes to their damage output. And I am including any relevant passives here, into this value. Helena, of course, has that huge 60% magic passive with her Dark Witch's Mastery. Fina, on the other hand, doesn't have any magic up passive abilities available to her. But even despite that, you can see here the total is relatively close. Helena, of course, is a bit higher. I'm not going to give her this category here, though. And that's because Dark Fina's base magic value is just so much better. In fact, it's the best in the entire game at 420 base magic. So despite this innate differential here in Helena's favor, in a completed build, they're actually going to be ending up in pretty similar ballparks. And in fact, if you have a 50% magic vision card in the party, Fina should actually be coming out ahead there just a bit. Alright, moving on here. And they both have access to 2 different damage types in their kits. So definitely always nice to have that kind of flexibility. Of course, both of them have a large portion of their kit dedicated to magic attacks. For a secondary type though, Helena does have access to the Spellblade subjob, giving her some magical slashing abilities, while Fina gets a single strike-based attack in the Law of Geoabsorption from her Scholar subjob. So I'm going to call this category more or less even there. In terms of their innate accuracy values, I'm going to give this one to Fina. She does actually have an accuracy passive available to her, which I have included in this number here at 185. And that's going to pull her well ahead of Helena in this category. In fact, even without that passive equipped, she is actually superior to Helena in that category. My next one up here is going to be skill modifiers, and this is actually a pretty big differentiation point between them. Fina caps out at just 185% modifier, while Helena gets that large 220% modifier with her Devastation ability. And that's going to definitely give her the win in this category. What about any innate cast speed reduction? Now, Helena again is going to take this one, and it is her Mastery 2 update, which does pull her ahead in this category. And when she gets that, she'll have access to a 40% reduced skill activation time right out of the box, which will actually be very significant for her and does give her a path to get to 1-tick casting. My next category is a key one, and that is their damage penetration values. And this will be covering both their spirit penetration as well as their magic res penetration. Now, in terms of spirit penetration, there really isn't much comparison here. This is definitely one of Helena's weaker attributes. Dark Fina is going to outpace her here in this category 40 to 15, where in terms of magic res penetration, they both have access to 20% there. So Dark Fina is going to definitely take this category overall. Now the next two that I have here are starting AP and range, and Helena does have a small edge actually in both of these categories. And range at times can be very, very significant. Her Arithmetician sub that she has access to can get up to a long 6 range, and it does have enhanced range height on those attacks as well, which can make her very well suited for height disparate maps on top of it. Now my last category in this round is, do they have access to a guaranteed hit? And notably, Helena will have the edge in this one as well. She does have access to a 100% hit skill in her main job, and that's her Job 25 Black Rose Judgment ability. Dark Fina, on the other hand, she doesn't have access to one anywhere in her kit. So that's something that you'll definitely need to account for when building her out if you're anticipating any sort of evade meta or evade units that you're going up against. Alright, so that is the round, guys, and overall, in terms of their general damage capabilities, I'm going to give this one to Helena. I don't actually think it's super close. Dark Fina, while she is not a slouch when it comes to damage, Helena is definitely just more focused and built in that direction. I think she is more capable in that arena, and her overall damage output should be superior in many situations. On to round 2, and this one is all about the utility, and what effects and unique skills can they bring to help turn the tide in battle. Now first up is a big one for any damage dealer, and that is access to a barrier break. Now notably, Dark Fina doesn't have one, and it's definitely one of the big holes in her kit. Helena, on the other hand, she does have a barrier break, and it's actually an area of effect one. And to this point, it is actually still pretty rare to have access to an area of effect barrier break, so she definitely has that going for her. My next couple here, I'm calling even between them. They both do have some form of drain attacks in their kits. Fina's, I think, is a touch better since it's an area of effect, and that's her Law of Geoabsorption. And there is actually more potential for her to use that because it is a large area of effect and it does very nice damage. The actual HP drain modifier on Helena's drain ability is actually much better, and I have actually seen her use it quite a bit to finish people off in battle and sort of heal herself back up, so I'm going to actually call this one even between them. The next one there is, do they have any way to seal the counterattacks of the enemy? And actually neither of them have that. And in fact, they don't have any innate counter block chance in their kits either. So it is a current weakness for both of them in that regard, and I actually see many attacks for them being reflexed in their future. Moving on to my next one, and what about any potential ailments that they can inflict on the enemy? And they actually both do have some options here. Helena's, I'd say, are maybe more well suited for manual control. From her Arithmetician sub, she does bring that level 3 disable. It's not one that the AI will often use, it doesn't do any damage, but it is a very nice skill nonetheless. She does actually have access to a couple more non-damage status effects from her main job sub, but that sub-job just isn't really often used. On the other hand, one of Dark Fina's marquee skills is an area of effect 25% chance to stop. And unlike Helena, this is one that her AI will often go to just because it is one of her highest damaging skills. And if you're not guarding against it, Stop can be a very impactful status and game winning on its own, and definitely one of the best status to have access to in the game. So Dark Fina definitely gets the edge here in this category. My next couple here are going to be Imperil related, and the first one is single target or unit resist Imperil. And Dark Fina is going to get the win on this one as well. She actually has access to a 30% single target resist in peril. Along that same line, my next category here is for an element in peril. And one of the things Black Rose is most well known for is her limit bursts, which of course has that 38% dark in peril. Huge damage on that one, and definitely a very important ability for Black Rose. Dark Fina, on the other hand, she doesn't have any elemental in peril in her kit, so this is a key differentiation point between them. Spirit Break is another big one, and Helena has that as well with her Black Rose Hex ability, another very large AoE that she has, and it does break Spirit by 30 before the damage is applied. So another very hard-hitting skill for her on top of that. Looking at Dark Fina, no Spirit Breaks anywhere in her kit, and Helena is going to take that one very easily. Now my last two categories in the round, they're both actually going to go to Dark Fina here, and it's two different dispels that she has access to in her kit. She has that general dispel on her limit burst. Always a nice thing to have access to knock out any buffs or haste or even hate on a tank. The next one is for her Runic Dispel ability, a very unique skill that she has. She's actually the first UR unit in the game to have that capability. So she's able to knock that Runic barrier off of Celeste, and that's actually a pretty big deal. Celeste is able to shut down so many magic units in this game, including Helena here. So this round ended up being relatively close for me, and it's actually pretty tough to call. I am going to give the round to Dark Fina by the slimmest of margins, and it's mostly going to be on the back of that unique Runic Dispel capability that she brings. Alright, on to round 3, guys, and this is the support rounds. And we're looking here at how these units can help themselves or their allies in terms of buffs or heals or etc. And the first category is any form of damage resist buffs that they can bring to the team. And I'm going to give this one to Fina. And she actually has several different options at her disposal. She has a dark and light resist buff that she can give to the party. She has a massive 40 area resist buff that she applies to herself. And she does also have access to a self buff which gives 20 slash and 20 area resist from her devout job as well. Black Rose, on the other hand, she has the Spellblade job, which will give her access to resist magic, a 38% magic resist buff. Still to this day, a very, very nice skill, but definitely more situational in use compared to what Dark Fina is bringing. All right, my next one is, do they have an innate damage barrier in their kit? And actually, neither of them have this. Now, of course, we know Helena does bring that via her TMR ability, but again, we're actually looking at the kits here, and that TMR is something that actually Dark Fina could use as well, so I'm going to call this one even. What about a modifier or damage increase buff? And that's going to be my next category. Helena, as we know, she doesn't have any sort of capability that way in her kit. Fina, though, actually has a couple of different options available to her. She has a 25 magic attack buff that she brings in her main job. On top of that, she has a 30 dark attack buff from her devout job, and that is one that she can apply to herself or to others. So Dark Fina is going to take this one very easily. On the healing fronts, they're both pretty capable, I'd say here. They have an assortment of single target or area of effect heals. They do both bring some instant healing capability as well. So this one's going to end up being pretty even for me. Now, neither of these units is going to be a heal-first sort of dedicated support-style unit, but in terms of autoplay, it is something that they will look to use if the enemy is out of range and they have an ally that is at 50% health or lower. If you're in the mid-fight, though, you're not going to be able to count on any healing coming from these guys. The next one that I have here is going to be access to an accuracy buff, and Helena is going to take this one. She has that 30 accuracy buff that she can give to herself and to the party. No accuracy buff at all for Dark Fina, though she does have one skill in her kit which does bring a 30% hit modifier to it. My next 3 categories, they're all going to go to Dark Fina. She has an agility buff, she has an attack and magic buff, and those are actually all coming on one skill, and that is her Law of Invigoration skill from Devout. That one, of course, does provide healing on top of that as well. Very, very nice skill. On top of that, she does bring a 30% debuff resistance buff as well from her Devout job. So definitely another very nice one to have access to. Now the last one for the round here is, do they have a way to decrease the time that they're spending casting? And that's a yes actually for both of them. They both actually have buffs available to them in their kits, which gets them an additional 35% reduction in their casting time. So this one's going to be even. So that's going to do it for round 3, guys. And as you can see, this one is going to pretty easily go to Dark Fina. And really, that's on the back of that Devout sub-job that she has. That job is really just all about buffs and supporting the team, so she gets helped out in a big way there. I do want to mention, though, once again, that this is not going to be a support-first style unit from an AI sense. She is an attack-first unit, So while it is really nice to have those sort of capabilities, certainly from the manual context, it's very strong to have that. I do just want to temper the expectations just a bit from an auto sense, because despite having many of the same capabilities, she is definitely not a Dark Resnick, and she will function more akin to a Sadali or Renan in that respect. All right, we're on to round 4. It's our final round, and this is X Factors. And here we're going to look at attributes that maybe don't necessarily fit into the other categories, and maybe a few things here which could be easy to overlook on first glance. But really, when you add them all together, they do represent a nice overall value. And first, we're going to talk about chaining here. Guild rates have become a lot more of a focus for players as of late, so having an innate chaining capability is something that players are going to want to look for. And Fina is going to take this category by a hair, and that's because she has a 4-hit chain on her Limit Burst. Otherwise they do both have access to 2-hit magical attacks. My next one up here is going to be Immortal Spirit or Re-Raise. Do they have it? Pretty important one, nowadays in terms of survivability and sustain on the battlefield. Dark Fina does have a self re-raise available to her, and she has 2 casts of it, importantly. Helena, as we know, she doesn't have this capability in her kit, and she didn't get anything similar in her Mastery revision either. And certainly her ability to stick around in battle does suffer because of it. Another important one for any mage in the current state of War of the Visions is, do they have any non-reflectable magic skills outside of their Limit Burst? And as of now, this is specifically for getting around Celis's Runic capability. And besides actually being able to turn off Runic entirely, Dark Fina actually does also have the Law of Geo-Absorption skill, something we've talked about here several times today. And that skill, being a magical strike attack, is non-reflectable. Looking over at Helena, and she actually does have that sort of capability as well. She has her Spellblade subjob, which gives her access to magical slashing attacks, and those can't be reflected either, so this category is even for me. Now next up, we're going to talk about Trust Masters, and the TMRs for both of them actually have very nice base stats on them, including that coveted agility stat from the TMR slot. In terms of the effects that they're bringing along, Dark Fina's is definitely much more offense-oriented with the magic res penetration and the cast time reduction that it's bringing. While Black Rose Hairpin, as we know, we've had it for a while, it's going to give you that nice 35% all damage barrier, as well as that hefty agility boost. If I'm splitting hairs on this one, Dark Fina's does have 2 casts available to it, which is very nice. A lot of modern TMRs are bringing that sort of capability. I am going to leave this category even though, despite that, they're both very, very nice TMRs. My next 2 categories I'm also going to call even, and these are just about some of the base attributes, that they have, and neither of them are particularly mobile units. They both just have that basic 3-1 movement, and they actually don't have any way to increase that within their kit. In terms of their basic attack damage, this one actually can be pretty important sometimes. If they get hit with a status ailments like Confuse or Berserk, or if they just happen to run out of AP or get silenced, unfortunately neither of them have access to a magic scaled basic attack, so they're just going to be doing minimal damage and be completely shut down in those scenarios. Now what about their innate mitigation in terms of defense and spirit numbers? Of course, defense and spirit aren't really what they used to be in the first year of the game. They are still very nice to have on any unit just for that base layer of protection though. And there actually has been some interesting new developments on the Japanese side. There has been new utility added to the game on some units that they're actually able to reduce the defense or spirit penetration of their opponents. And that definitely signals that these stats are going to be gaining back some of their relevance in the future. In any event, this category really is no contest. Dark Fina has some excellent defense and spirit-based passives that she has access to. And she can really bulk up her totals here, especially when it comes to spirit. Dark Fina definitely has many good passives, available to her, and you can't really equip them all. So if you're really going to go all in on your defense and spirit, you will have to give up some other things. Still very nice flexibility to have nonetheless. Black Rose, on the other hand, she's actually extremely weak in this category. It's one of her biggest weaknesses. She doesn't have access to any defense or spirit at all, and in fact her spirit actually goes into the negative with her magic up passive. Alright guys, the last category of the battle here, and this one is going to be, do they have any sort of status ailment protection that they can bring? And Fina is going to take this one as well. She has a self buff that completely nullifies Berserk, Confuse, and Stun for 3 turns. And actually this was a skill I was a little bit mixed on when I initially looked at Dark Fina, but it has actually ended up aging pretty well with the rise of the ice elements on the Japanese side. Of course, Agrius and Snow, they're bringing a couple of those statuses with a very high chance to land them on their limit bursts. So if you're going to be going up against Ice with your Dark team, I definitely can see that buff becoming pretty valuable, especially since you're going to be running Dark Fina with a very high faith number. Helena, on the other hand, she doesn't bring any sort of utility, either with an active or a passive, to nullify any statuses. She does, though, have that natural stop resist in her kit, which can be very, very nice, especially against Agrius. Alright guys, so that is the X Factors round, and it ends up going pretty handily once again to Dark Fina. I think she does actually have several nice things here, which do really set her apart from Black Rose. Alright guys, so that is the versus battle. But before I announce the winner here, I just want to say that one thing that I am leaving out of this discussion, at least for now, is the revisions to the Scholar job, which were just dropped on the Japanese side. I did decide to leave those out of consideration, mainly because Helena has two very old jobs herself in the Arithmetician and Spellblade jobs, which, if these first set of revisions is any indication, she should be seeing game-changing and significant upgrades of her own here in the near future, as they sort of go through that exercise in updating and revising the old jobs. So on that front, I do think it is a little bit too early to judge that particular component. To be clear, some of the skill upgrades that are happening to Scholar are on skills that Fina doesn't even have access to, so I do think that her adjustments there will end up being a little bit more minor compared to some other units. So, we'll just have to continue to monitor that balance revision, as it unfolds. I think that those balance updates in general have the potential to completely revitalize and change some old units, including Helena here. So we'll just have to sort of wait and see what happens there and maybe take a look at it again in the future. That said, for the current state of War of the Visions as the game is today, and considering all of these points of comparison that we looked at, Dark Fina just sort of runs away with this one, and she's going to be my versus winner today. I think it is a really interesting thing to look at with these two units because it is very much a microcosm of exactly how the game has changed and evolved over the last 12 to 14 months that's transpired between the releases of these two units. Helena, when she was released, she was very much ahead of the curve at that time, and she actually had very good survivability for a mage in that meta, and she would often take hits and then just annihilate you in return. It did really make her a very oppressive unit because no one could really compete with what she was bringing to the battle. Of course, as we know, that's really not the case anymore. For the current state of the game, her survivability just really hasn't aged all that well, and that's definitely due to a few things. The nice base resistances that she has, in terms of slash and magic damage, they're definitely not what they used to be. Those damage types are more highly penetrated now by many different units, and other damage dealers have really just caught up and even surpassed her in the metagame. At this point, we have very high-powered 100 cost units for pretty much every element out there. Now, Helena's damage, while I do think that it is better than Dark Fina's, and she did take that damage category pretty handily, that is just not also what it used to be either. For one, she's really lacking when it comes to spirit penetration, as we mentioned, but also since she was released, the general state of tanks in the game and general mitigation tools that we have vastly improved as well. So Helena's Limit Burst, despite how powerful it just isn't as scary as it once was. Can it still one-shot some units if you're not prepared for it? Absolutely. And for that reason, she's always going to be a unit that you'll have to respect. But at the same time, it definitely is making her very much a one-trick pony. The current state of War of the Visions PvP has a lot more back and forth, a lot more healing and sustain, in the game. And that contrasts quite a bit from when Helena was released, where it was very much a one-shot fest and, you could win battles just based on that alone. So comparing that to Dark Fina, who may not have that carry level damage, her sustain, her survivability, and even some of her support capabilities are just things that Helena can't even begin to touch, at least with how her sub-jobs stand right now. And that definitely makes Dark Fina much better suited to trade blows and outlast enemies out there on the battlefield today. Now with that said, despite them both being 100 cost units of the same elements, and despite having that very similar mage attack role, I do think that there is some nice potential to actually run these two units together. Their kits have some nice synergy angles that you could leverage. I do think though that if you wanted to run these two units together, that you'd really want a strong tank out in front to sort of be out there and protect Helena, and Dark really just doesn't have that currently. Something to maybe look forward to in the future though. Alright guys, so that is the battle of Dark Fina and Helena, and again I think this one was very interesting to look at, just because it does really give you that good perspective on how things have changed over the last year or so. And considering all of this, I really do think that Dark Fina is a pretty good unit. She's definitely worth a pull if you play Dark, even if you have built up Helena in the past. Is Fina going to completely dominate and own the meta as Helena did, when she was released? I don't think so. The overall elemental balance in the game currently, I think, is in a very good spot. There are a lot of great teams that you can run for pretty much every element out there currently. And I think that's really what's making PvP very interesting at the moment. That said, Fina is definitely going to be giving Dark a new look that they really haven't had before. And I do think that the mix of things that she brings is pretty hard to defend against. So what are you guys thinking on this one? Do you agree with my overall assessment here? And what are your pull plans going to be when Dark Fina is released here in a couple of weeks in Global? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. I do hope you guys liked that comparison trailer I made there at the beginning to sort of set the stage and compare their stats. So let me know what you thought about that in the comments down below as well. If you guys like it, I'll definitely keep it as a feature going forward. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It definitely helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, please hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there. I'll see you guys in the next one.